everyone. Thank you, Prakash. Um, Welcome everyone to the ongoing series of monthly presentations that Proud Alliance sponsors, trying to address topics of interest to especially people that are action-oriented, really want to see change, people that are interested in learning more about Prout, um, and just sort of starting to reach out and building a network of people that are aware and maybe the opportunities networking can lead to collaboration. Um, we are always open to suggestions about topics that people would like to see addressed. Please submit those, and I will make my regular plea for anyone that has an area of expertise. Please give some thought to if you'd be willing to share that with people that attend these sessions. Um, we have a couple of things coming up in April on the 10th. Dr. Chris Duffin will be doing a presentation on collaboration in economic and social justice work. Dr. Duffin is a clinical psychologist, has a longtime student of Prout, and kind of brings that perspective to the work that she's been doing. And she points out that collaboration isn't just talking. So I think her presentation will be excellent. Then in June, or pardon me, actually in May, um, we will have a climate adaptation through economic democracy by Sri Raksha, uh, who's currently a student working on her master's in economics. And she will be talking basically from a recently published article. So she's doing some very dynamic work. And what's interesting about her is she's actually a software engineer, a master's degreed engineer that is really, I think, at a point where she's thinking maybe she needs to take her career trajectory in a different direction. So we applaud that. And then coming up in June, um, a presentation I think many of us are looking forward to, Arthur Pacheco, uh, who is a native of Brazil and currently in the United States. We're fortunate to have him in this part of the world doing some graduate work, but he has agreed to do a presentation about what's happening in Brazil and Latin America in general, which I think will be very important for people, just to have that awareness and an awareness by someone that comes from a Prout perspective and trying to review what is going on in those parts of the world. But this evening, I want to focus on Prout and Other Progressive Movements. This is by Roar Bjonnes. It's my great pleasure to have known Roar for a good many years at this point. He is a longtime activist. He is a deep student, educator, published author about Prout. Um, and I'm really looking forward to his approach of really trying to make people well aware of the many positive progressive things that are happening and to maybe distinguish some of those things that we often hear about, how they are different or in alignment with Prout as we understand it. So at this point, Roar, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, John. It's a pleasure to be here. So, as some of you know, I grew up in Norway, and I grew up in a family that was not totally extraordinary in during that time, but still kind of unique. My grandparents were fundamentalist Christians, and my parents were communists, and we all lived in the same house. And so, with that upbringing, I had no other choice but to become a Proutist because neither seemed to fit the bill. You know, the more I learned about the world, the more I realized that neither of these worldviews was going to had the solutions that we need. So at that time, in the early 70s, Norway was about to join the European Union. The European Union started after the Second World War. There was a big movement against the European Union at the time, and actually Norway has never joined the European Union. My father, as I mentioned, was a socialist, communist, and so I was part of that leftist movement at that early time in my youth, actually before I was introduced to Prout and Pierre Sarkar. And so that's my background. And so some of my biases are there from the left. And that will probably be seen in my presentation. So take that into consideration. But my father, as he got to know about Prout, he became very much interested in Prout. And as a matter of fact, felt that Prout really had the solutions that was missing on the left, that socialism was great as a criticism against capitalism, but didn't really have concrete solutions. So that's some of my background. And then later on, I studied agronomy, and I was part of a movement to start organic farming within the agronomy system, within the educational system. And we managed to do that at the school I went to. And then 15 years later, I find out that the whole education department in Norway is based on organic farming. So that's a little bit of my background. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Hold on a second here. Just give me a few moments, and then we'll get started. So the topic is Prout and other progressive movements. And I want to start by quoting P.R. Sarkar, and I'm going to read the whole thing. Revolution always takes place around a sentiment. If there's no strong common sentiment, a revolution cannot take place. Sentiment is always stronger than logic. According to Prout, there are two types of sentiments, positive sentiments and negative sentiments. Positive sentiments are synthetic in nature. They unite society and elevate humanity, enhance collective interest, and encourage progressive development. Negative sentiments are narrow in scope and divide society. Some important positive sentiments include anti-exploitation sentiment, revolutionary sentiment, moral sentiment, cultural sentiment, universal sentiment, and spiritual sentiment. Some negative sentiments include communalism, patriotism, nationalism, provincialism, lingualism, and racism. And after that last paragraph, Baba starts talking about fascism and Nazism and Hitler and how he used racism to unite the people in Germany, and that negative sentiment led to disastrous consequences and the Second World War. So I am bringing up this quote because we are living in a time today that we are sort of faced with this predicament of the rise of the right and authoritarianism, neo-fascism, and so on. And at the same time, there's sort of a vacuum among the progressive movement. And so we are at a very delicate time in the history. I'm going to talk about 6 different aspects in this presentation. The personal, which I already covered. I'm going to talk about some new economy groups, some new economy movements that I think are very important and that we can collaborate with. And then other progressive organizations. And then talk about what we have in common with them, and then where we differ, and where we can come to a common agreement and be part of a common movement. So that in broad outline is the program for tonight. Before we get into that, I just want to add a little bit more to my personal history. In the 90s, this was probably 92, 93, Ravi Logan and myself, I had been publishing the Prout Journal for a few years, and then we started a magazine called Common Future, Ravi Logan and myself. And as you can see on the cover, if you can read it, it says Common Future, Ecology, Economy, Culture, Consciousness. That, or those themes, were in many ways ahead of their time. At that, right after 1987 was when the Brundtland Commission coined the term sustainable development. This was at the time in history when people were starting to realize that we have been exploiting nature and that we needed to do something different. In other words, a new sort of reform capitalism started called sustainable development. That movement had been going on and has deepened and changed in many ways since that time, and I'm going to go into that in some more deep detail. But I just want to mention this because we as Proutists, in many ways, were ahead of the curve, because this is what the most progressive groups today are talking about. They're talking about the integration of worldviews, of ideologies or ideas, philosophy with culture, culture with economics, economics with ecology. As you can see here, the first issue was about the greening of capitalism, its promises and limitations. And at that time, there was a lot of activities around the socially responsible businesses, and all of this had started at that moment. The second photograph is many years later, in 2020, we organized, a group of Proutists organized a conference in Portugal called the Future Planet Europe. It was a European conference, and it was organized by Future Planet, which actually now is System Change Alliance. It has changed its name. But that was a conference partly as a critique against what was going on in Europe with the European Union and some of the problems with the European Union. And the great thing about the conference is that it was very well attended. I think we had about 350 people came. And one of the great alternative economists from Europe, Erik Reinert from Norway, came and spoke. And then in the panel here, along myself, there are mostly Portuguese speakers, but we had James Quilligan from the United States also came, who is the leader, has been the leader, the managing director for economic democracy here in the US, economic democracy advocates. So that is a little bit about my background and some of the activities that I took part in early on. So without further ado, I just want to get straight into it. And I want to talk about an economic system called Doughnut Economics that I'm sure some of you have heard about. And Doughnut Economics was developed by Kate Raworth. And the great thing about Doughnut Economics is in part the very simple design that you see in here, which is basically a design that shows that the social foundation and the economic system of any society needs to operate within a safe space for humanity and for nature. And so in the outer realm, we have the different ecological ceilings that we cannot overreach or overshoot. And that these 9 ceilings were developed by Johan Rockström, a Swedish scientist. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But Doughnut Economics has become very, very popular, and is sort of given reform capitalism a new boost. Now, as I say here, the weakness of Doughnut Economics is Prout's strength and vice versa. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that what is missing in the Doughnut is Prout. Even though Kate Raworth is an economist and she is deeply schooled in economics and understands many of the problems with capitalism, she hasn't really outlined in detail an economic system like Prout. And so that is what is missing. And then what do I mean by vice versa? Well, in Prout, we are not as detailed in our principles and systems in ecology as many of the new thinkers and here specifically Doughnut Economics. So I think it's important that when we think of looking at other groups, thinkers, that we don't look at Prout as having all the solutions, because we don't. There are many things in Prout that are basically principles and policies, and there are many details that we need to work out. And I think that's an important sort of starting point. Before the Doughnut, there was E.F. Schumacher, the British Buddhist economist, who wrote Small is Beautiful in the early 1970s. And he, in many ways, is the father of ecological economy. So I just wanted to mention him because he was tremendously influential and an inspiration for many of these thinkers. So here are these 9 areas that Johan Rockström developed in terms of where we have overshot, so to speak. And the 6 of these areas have are sort of reaching crisis levels. Climate change is one, biosphere integrity or biodiversity loss of the biodiversity, plants and animals, land system changes, deforestation, desertification, and so on and so forth. I don't need to go into all of these things, but basically it is showing that we as a humanity is at the crisis level when it comes to the environment. I want to contrast 2 systems and 2 ideas. One, as we just talked about, Doughnut Economics, with Emanuel Wallerstein's core, periphery, and semi-periphery, what he calls the world system. Emanuel Wallerstein basically saying that the reason why we have overshoot, he didn't say that specifically, but I'm interpreting it that way. Why did we end up in such a precarious and environmentally critical situation? Well, according to Wallerstein, because the core is capitalistic. The core is bringing labor, cheap labor and raw materials from the periphery, which the periphery are basically the third world, the people in the South, poor countries. And the semi-periphery are sort of developing nations. And then the core are the capitalist nations, the United States and the European nations, who have been, through imperialistic and free trade agreements, been reaping cheap labor and raw materials from the poor, from the South, bringing it into the core, and then reproducing it and then selling products back to these countries, and of course making them dependent via loans and so on and so forth. So it's a very unwholesome system. Wallerstein predicted that the core will, in very many ways, the same thing as Baba said, will kind of explode and or implode. Baba said, or Sarkar said, it will explode like a firecracker. So I think these two images are very important right now. We need to get from the core exploding to a more balanced system, as they're talking about, or Kate Raworth is talking about in Doughnut Economics. But then how do we get there? And in other words, what are some of the core ideas in Doughnut Economics, and how do they contrast to Prout? So this is a photo of Kate Raworth. So she has basically 7 points that she talks about in her book Doughnut Economics. Change the goal. What does that mean? It means to shift from pursuing GDP growth to meeting the needs of everybody within the means of the living planet. So very much a Proutistic goal. In other words, Prout is about making sure that everybody has the basic needs. So that is the number one goal in Doughnut Economics as well. And then a very clear environmental point that we need to do that by not over-exploiting nature. Seeing the big picture, we need to recognize the interdependence of the economy with society and the natural environment, because capitalist economics thinks of itself as a self-contained system, separate from nature, separate from humanity. It's sort of a mathematical system that will be perfect if we do the perfect things. But of course, we know that hasn't happened and it will never happen. Nurture human nature, promote diversity, participation, collaboration, and so on, so that human values are integrated into the economic system. Think in systems. Systems thinking has been a growing science over the years, and it is very much part of ecological and economic thinking these days. People like Fritjof Capra, Jeremy Lent, and others are very big in this, and I will mention a few other people later as well. Be distributive, another very strong Proutist point. We need to redistribute power and resources and economics so that everybody has a stake in the economy and in the system. Be regenerative, so that economics are like nature, regenerative and circulative. Now, of course, the downside of all this, as I mentioned before, and I will emphasize several times, capitalism has just bought all of this wholesale. And so now big capitalist corporations are talking, oh, yes, we are distributive. Yes, we are regenerative. Yes, we are into sustainable development, and so on and so forth. The last point, be agnostic about growth, which means that capitalism has been addicted to GDP growth, to maximum profit. And so, yes, we need growth, but we need a certain kind of growth, which is mainly human growth, human well-being. So again, a very Proutistic point. So as you can see, many great Proutistic ideas, but as I mentioned, the economic system itself, which is so beautifully developed in Prout, is not there. Again, just a few differences between Prout and Doughnut Economics. Prout emphasizes progressive utilization of resources, aiming to maximize their use efficiently and equitably. But again, of course, within natural boundaries, that has to be there as well. Doughnut Economics focuses on operating within the environmental limits. So that's sort of the strong point, which we as Proutists need to acknowledge. Economic structure. Prout proposes a specific 3-tiered economic structure, as well as economic democracy, decentralization, and so on and so forth. The 5 fundamental principles are very clear, and so many aspects of Prout are missing in Doughnut Economics. They do not prescribe a particular economic structure, so it can easily be co-opted by capitalism, and that is exactly what is happening. And then lastly, the spiritual aspect. Prout incorporates spiritual and ethical values into its economic framework, which is not the focus of Doughnut Economics. Then another economic system that is very popular today is degrowth. I will start by mentioning some of the original thinkers. André Gorz, an Austrian French social philosopher, who basically said that nature is entropical. Everything breaks down, and if we use it too much, we will use it up. In other words, he was pointing out non-renewable resources like oil. Well, if we just keep on using oil, it's going to end. We are polluting nature and so on. So he had a kind of pessimistic outlook about the future of humanity and the future of the world. But there was so much truth in what he was saying, because he pointed out the fact that we cannot just keep exploiting nature as if it's a free lunch forever and ever. So Herman Daly, a Canadian-American economist, made significant contributions to these concepts. He developed what he called a steady state economy, very similar to Doughnut Economics, but he was earlier than Doughnut Economics, and in many ways we could say a father of both Doughnut Economics and degrowth economics. He distinguished between growth and development, emphasizing qualitative improvements over quantitative expansion. So in other words, emphasizing the same kind of idea in Prout that we think of progress as human progress, that the economy should serve human needs and not just human greed. He introduced the concept of uneconomic growth, where the cost of growth outweighs benefits. So again, this is part of the degrowth philosophy, but he did not prescribe a new economic system again. So again, Prout is missing. He advocated the regulated market economy. So again, a kind of reform capitalist system. Now, a few years later, a very quite young guy, I think he's only 43, Jason Hickel. He is one of the most famous proponents of degrowth economics today. He calls himself an eco-socialist. So again, many of his ideas are very similar to Prout, but again, his main approach is criticizing capitalism and the growth system, or the GDP economic system that we have today. So that's sort of his main weakness, we could say. But again, so many similar ideas to Prout. So his main focus is on the West, that the Western economies, the Western capitalist economies have exploited the third world, similar to what Wallerstein is talking about, and we need to change course completely. That's sort of his main argument. And then within sustainable economics, there are sort of debates between the degrowthers and the sustainable development people. The sustainable development people say we can use capitalism, we can grow ourselves out through science and so on, and create better models and better ways to do things through technology. So this is a big debate going on within sustainable development and alternative economics today. Then moving to a kind of a different organization for sure, Progressive International and DiEM25. You may remember Yanis Varoufakis, who was the finance minister in Greece. He's progressive, he's a Marxist. He started an organization called DiEM25, which is in many ways an anti-capitalist organization, anti the way that the EU is functioning and how the EU has is similarly to Wallerstein's thinking, been exploiting the poorer countries in the EU, like Portugal, Romania, and these outlying countries, these smaller countries. And so he says we need to reform the EU. The EU is an oligarchical system. It is not serving the people, and it's not serving the environment, and so on. So very critical person, and very progressive in so many ways. Shreko Horvat is not Serbian. Anyway, I forgot which country he's coming from, but he's also similarly a Marxist philosopher, very popular in Europe and within these ideas. So these are some of the main people. And these two organizations have become very popular. Noam Chomsky from the US, Arundhati Roy from India, and many of the sort of famous, well-known progressives are supporting this. Naomi Klein from Canada, very much active in these organizations. So again, many ideas that are similar to Prout. So here is Yanis Varoufakis. So his ideas is to seek global cooperation for economic transformation and to sort of become an umbrella organization for the left, for the progressive movement. Now, what has happened? So let me sort of rephrase that. So within the sustainable development thinkers, what is the main problem? The main problem is that capitalism has co-opted it by saying, yes, we are sustainable. Yes, we can do regenerative economics. Look at us. We are recycling. We are doing good. We are planting trees and so on and so forth. So that's how capitalism has adopted or co-opted that. What has happened in the left, in the socialist movement? The socialist movement, in many ways, has become an intellectual movement and a sort of a cultural Marxist, socialist, woke, and that's where a lot of the criticism against being woke comes from. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think, the left, and we see that in the US too, through the Democratic Party, has lost touch with the workers, with the working class and the middle class. And this has happened. And so there's a huge schism now within the left and the socialist movement, and being in touch with the working class or the middle class. So that these are two issues that are going on, and again, why Prout has so many of the answers. I won't go into so many details about that, but if you have questions later, we can go back to this. But yes, there are similarities, but there are also differences. And one of the things that Sarkar said, one of the weaknesses of the left is its constant criticism of capitalism, and that makes capitalism more and more clever in adapting and co-opting ideas and sort of shifting and changing and being more, you could say, more sophisticated in its exploitations. So Sarkar emphasized the importance of positive ideas and constructive ideas and to create real change. Then we have another important movement called bioregionalism, which started in the 1970s. There are different, mostly American thinkers, I believe. Alan van Newkirk, Raymond Dussman, Peter Berg, Kirkpatrick Sale, who wrote a book called The Dwellers in the Land, and became very influential in the bioregional movement in the 70s. So today, you will find that many of the alternative economy groups within the Doughnut, within sustainable development, people who talk about regenerative economics and so on, they use this term bioregionalism. Why is this so important? because it has many similarities to the socioeconomic units in Prout. Proud Samaj are socioeconomic units based on cultural and economic factors, while bioregions are typically defined by ecological boundaries, watersheds, the way that the landscape is shaped, and so on. Secondarily, cultural and economic issues, but that is also part of the bioregional movement. So bioregionalism is different from pure environmentalism. Environmentalism, at least the way it started out, was very much about saving nature, taking care of species, and setting aside forests and so on, sort of outside of human culture. Whereas bioregionalism realized that we are part of nature and we need to integrate with nature. So that is one of the beautiful ideas in the bioregional system, or with their ideas. So there are similarities, but also differences. And again, Prout has so much to offer here because Prout broadens the scope of the bioregion to include, decentralized economics, economic democracy, the government's framework, local economies, culture, linguistics, and so on, which is very much part of forming what Sarkar called socioeconomic units. And also Sarkar said that it is very important that when we build a movement, it is based on these socioeconomic units. One of the best examples of that today in the West, I am not familiar with what's going on in India or other parts of the world. The Philippines, for example, there is also a strong movement there. But in Portugal, which actually grew out of that conference we had in 2020, in the northern part of Portugal, where Prout has a master unit, there is the Cova de Beira socioeconomic or Samaj bioregion. They're actually using the term bioregion because it is so easily identifiable to other progressives. And so that it's very easy to bring them along when you're using these kinds of terms. So they have developed block level planning in an area, and they now have 100 organizations, members of that bioregion, and they're starting a co-op. And actually, as a matter of fact, Pradeepa will give a talk about this on the 29th, I believe, on this month. So look out for that. I'll forward some information about that when I get more information about it. So Prout's socioeconomic units are about geography, not just watersheds, as in often in bioregions, sentimental legacy, the collective psychology of the people, the culture, common economic potentials, needs, problems, and then ethnicity and so on. And I'm using the map of Scandinavia here because Scandinavia has the potential of becoming, I think, fairly soon, a strong socioeconomic unit. There are smaller organizations in Scandinavia talking about creating a Scandinavian union rather than being part of the European Union. The British Isles could become another socioeconomic unit very easily if this kind of consciousness evolves, and so on and so forth. So if we think of Europe, for example, and of course the United States as well, the different regions would then become different socioeconomic areas or bioregions based on these criteria. And in a sense, that is the future of Prout, rather than looking at national boundaries, national sentiment, which can be so destructive. And we're seeing that happening now in the United States with nationalism on the rise. We're seeing it in Europe, nationalism, fascism, neo-Nazism, and authoritarianism. These negative sentiments are on the rise now. Then everybody knows about the Green parties, so I won't spend too much time on that. But in 2016, the US Green Party passed a motion in favor of rejecting both capitalism and state socialism, supporting instead an alternative economic system based on ecology and decentralization of power. So again, the Green Party has, I think they got some 600,000 votes, I think was almost 700,000 votes at the most. That was in 2016, I believe. So it's a very small party, but of course, there are hardly any strong political parties except for the Democrats and the Republicans here. So they are the fourth largest party in the United States. But in Europe, in Germany, for example, the German Green Party has 113 seats in the Bundestag out of some 770 seats. It got, I think, it's the fourth largest party in Germany today. So in many of the European countries, the Green parties are stronger and more directly involved in politics. But again, it's reformed capitalism. So we talked about Prout versus the Marxist left a little bit. Excuse me. But just to talk a little bit more about it. So both Prout and Marxism is anti-capitalist. That is something we clearly have in common. But Prout offers a comprehensive economic model. And this is missing completely in Marxism. Marx, again, was brilliant in his criticism of the defects of capitalism, but he offered really no alternative. We got communism, which was a disaster, but we did get some great things or some positive things coming out of the Marxist model, and that was social democracy. Social democracy is particularly, I would say, in Scandinavia, social democracy developed as a kind of middle ground, a softer socialism that has many good points, certainly many weaknesses, and it's certainly not the model of the future by any means, but it was definitely not the kind of authoritarian, exploitative, inhumane communism that we saw in Eastern Europe, for example, and we have seen in China. Very, very different. And in some ways, the United States is a softer model or a more aggressive, rather, model of that. It's not as balanced as the European, and it's certainly not the Scandinavian model. When magazines like The Economist today are talking about the future of the world, they're pointing to Scandinavia and saying that the Scandinavian model is where we all need to go. And here in the United States, Bernie Sanders is very much in that league. Bernie Sanders, when he was running for president, was making Scandinavian countries as sort of a model to emulate. Yes, there are many positive things about that, but I don't think it is the solution. Then we have the New Economy movement with Gar Alperovitch, American organization. He has written a book about the new economy and his criticism of neoclassical and Keynesian economics, which is, I'm sorry. My throat is drying out there. Give me a second. I have a I have a tendency to dry out when I'm talking, so you just have to bear with me for a little bit. So again, the nice thing about the new economy movement is this holistic aspect: ecological economics, solidarity economy, meaning solidarity with the poor, solidarity with the South, the other poor countries, but also poor people inside the country. About the commons, nature as a common, nature as common ownership, the internet as a commons, copyrights as a commons, and so on. Degrowth, that is also part of this systems thinking, as I mentioned before. Buddhist economics from E.F. Schumacher. And the new economy movement in many ways inspired the ESOP movement and the co-op movement, and the Cleveland model came out of this in Cleveland. It's just not that huge of a project, but it includes different co-ops, libraries, university, hospital, where they created the kind of model local economy so that they can cooperate. The hospital buys from the co-op and so on and so forth, so that they're creating a local economy model so that the profits, the resources are spent and used within the community. And again, very, very Proutistic. I mentioned Bernie Sanders and the Social Democrats, Democratic Socialists. There are socialist parties in the United States. The social, I think they're called the Social Democratic Party. They have about 90,000 members. And so there are some socialist parties that are very active and doing good work. There are, of course, also progressive Democrats within the Democratic Party that are doing wonderful work. Many local politicians that are doing great things in their communities and so on. Here are some other thinkers that I have been involved with and that know about Prout. Helena Norvig Hodge started the local economy movement, Local Futures. She's from Sweden, but headquartered in Australia. She's world renowned and wrote a book called about Ladakh that became very well known. Daniel Christian Wahl is a German ecologist and thinker and writer, very, very popular within the Schumacher Institute in England. He gives classes and teaches there. He's a consultant. He also knows about Prout. Both of them has attended conferences that we have organized in Europe. Andrew Harvey is an English writer and a spiritual thinker and author who has become inspired by Prout. Recently, I've been in touch with him. Erik Reinert, the Norwegian economist that I mentioned, is very well known in Europe. He proposes something he called the other canon of economics, sort of a unorthodox rather than orthodox economics, which would be sort of the standard capitalist economists. He wrote a book called Why Rich Countries Stay Rich and Why Poor Countries Stay Poor. Brilliant analysis of the disasters of free trade, what free trade has done to the third world, and how both the United States and Europe has gained tremendously cheap labor, cheap raw material, but given very little back to those poor countries that they have exploited. Andre Barata is a Portuguese philosopher who, when I published my book, Growing a New Economy, I give talks in Europe and especially in Portugal. He introduced me and wrote the foreword to the Portuguese version of that book. He's one of the I would say, one of the main sort of thinkers on the left in Portugal. He's very much involved with the protests there in the Cova, the Beira region of northern Portugal. So, as I mentioned earlier, capitalism has co-opted all of these movements and ideas. So today we have sustainable capitalism, we have green capitalism, we have regenerative capitalism, we have conscious capitalism, we have double, triple, quadruple bottom line capitalism, and of course we have social democracy and the welfare state. So what we are sort of, my conclusion is this, that, excuse me, Prout stands out by offering a comprehensive post-capitalist economic system. It really is unique. We stand out. However, very few people know about Prout. Why is that? What can we do about it? That is really a question that we need to ask ourselves. Why is it that we are sitting on this heap of brilliant ideas and principles, and yet there are so few people who knows about it? I'll offer some thoughts around that. One is, I think that we have used the wrong approach, marketing approach, so to speak. We have marketed Prout as all you need to know is Prout. If you know Prout, everything will be fine. The system will change. We have sort of tried to ram it down people's throats too aggressively and too enthusiastically. And I think it's time to be a little bit more humble, number one. Number two, a little bit more clever and strategic, and to offer Prout piecemeal rather than this Prout is the only way out, which we have been doing for so long. So that is my main critique as far as how to market, how to sell Prout, how to develop Prout. And then I have a suggestion. Apart from that, of course, there is the timing of everything. We have no power over timing of history. Sarkar said that capitalism will explode like a firecracker. When will that happen? Nobody knows. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now. We don't know. So that we have no control over. So now we're getting sort of to the heart of what I want to propose, and it has to do with economic democracy. This is a quote from Yanis Varoufakis. So imagine a world in which our political rights and our economic rights were in sync. They are not in sync at the moment. Imagine that you worked in a corporation where the only people who had the right to be shareholders of the corporation are those who worked in it. So in other words, Yanis Varoufakis is talking about economic democracy. Tom Hartman, one of the main sort of leftist progressive talk show hosts in America, is talking about economic democracy. Reich, the former labor secretary of Clinton, is talking about economic democracy. Here are two Democratic Party politicians talking about it in an article that I found. In a democracy, power should be in the hands of workers, community members, and democratically accountable representatives, not billionaires who govern to enrich themselves. The Republican budget is the natural outcome of an economy that funnels power and wealth to elites while leaving working people to fend for themselves. Let's show the billionaires we can build a democratic alternative to their corporate oligarchy. Rashida Tlaib of Michigan's 12th district, and Michael McCarty from the University of Santa Cruz. They wrote a book together. So what is it that we have in common? We reject the GDP profit-making system of capitalism, materialism, and capitalist growth. We have a holistic approach, which we have talked about, an economy that is degrowth in the sense of being well-being centered. Everyone that I mentioned would agree to this, would agree to ecological sustainability, would agree with economic democracy, an economy that is local and decentralized, and a society that is diverse and pluralistic and treats nature in the same way. Respect the diversity of nature, global economic and environmental goals. So these are some of the things that we have in common. What can we do about this? What I'm suggesting is that we start to focus not only on in the United States, but in Prout, in all parts of the world, build a common movement and campaign around economic democracy and sustainability. I just made up a slogan: economic democracy, people and planet thriving together. There are, better people, greater people than me that can come up with better slogans, but I think you get the idea. And how can we kick this off? Well, there are, again, many different ways we can do it, but one idea would be to have an economic democracy conference in 26, 27, or whenever we feel we're ready, inviting some of these speakers and great people that I mentioned from these different organizations, and from there put Prout on the map, so to speak. But I feel that this is what is missing in Prout, a common strategy and a common movement that we all work together against because we are few in number, and a way, and an easy way to spread Proutistic ideas. And I think economic democracy is one of the best, because so many people will agree and understand why we need it. So that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. That was amazing. Are you able to stay on if people have questions or comments? I know we're pretty much at the hour here, but if people are interested and you're willing, Roar, to stay on, let's see if people have questions or comments they'd like to share.
Sure. Sorry about my coughing spells there.
If any of you in attendance have a question, maybe raise your hand or let us know, and a couple of us will kind of watch and see if someone is interested. Yes, Chris Duffin.
Okay, so Roar, I mean, it's a huge question, but what kind of comment could you make about the current political situation? I know we don't want to get real involved in politics, or maybe we do, but how would you interpret what's going on with the economy in the US and the world with Trump and Musk and the possible collapse of capitalism?
Well, yeah, that is a big that is a big question.
Yeah.
Well, there are many ways to look at this. I think that the social cycle of Pierre Sarkar is basically pointing towards the Catrian, a more sort of strong leader, part of humanity's evolution. So what we have today is kind of the worst examples of the strong leader, authoritarian leaders that are immoral, capitalists, billionaires, and having racist ideas and so on. And so there's a polarization happening. And I think that polarization will increase as 10 years ago, there were a small group of billionaires that own about 3 trillion. Today, there are a few thousand billionaires that own 15 trillion. So concentration of wealth is happening, and then there's, at the same time, exploitation is increasing, inequality is increasing, even though they are arguing that people are getting more and it's getting better and so on, but actually inequality is dramatically increasing. And so that's why I brought up Wallerstein's image, because I think what is happening is that the core is going to implode or explode fairly soon. When it will happen, it could be, like I said, tomorrow or 10 or 20 years from now. I don't know. But so polarization is happening, and as we have increased polarization, there will also be increased positivity and good things happening at the same time. And that's where Prout comes in, and that's why there's so many amazing people in all of these different groups and organizations, and we need to collaborate with them and to work together. That's a very broad answer, but
Yeah, because there's a lot going on in politics right now. For instance, the Working Families Party and Move On and Indivisible, they're all collaborating and working together to try to organize, especially the younger people, for sure the younger people. So they're involved, and they need Prout, and they know they need something. They don't have a vision of the future. And they're getting they've got a following.
yeah.
And
Roar,
there's your Shudras to unite.
Roar, I have a
working
question for
class.
you. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, no, I'm done.
Yeah, I'd be curious, in the context of trying to reach out and work with others. At this point, like the Systems Change Alliance that you're, co-founder, very active with, what kind of strategies are you employing to address? I think the frustration that many of us are recognizing is that TINA, there is no alternative, dominates world thinking. Most people think this is what we've got. We're just trying to figure out how to survive in it. So to your point, very few people really know about Prout or know about viable alternatives. And so I'm curious, just in terms of action items, I think your idea about an economic democracy conference is great, but what are you seeing happening with some of the other groups that you're working with, in that practical sort of effort of, reaching out, working with others?
Well, things are happening on a smaller scale, and which is good. And what you guys are doing there in Eugene, with the Substack articles coming out and getting the attention of Robert Reich and Tom Hartman, and things like that are happening. You're working with bioregional groups and so on and so forth. In Norway, Prouties are working within the leftist movement, and there was a big conference some years ago, and basically they were saying, they pointed at Edward Mogstad, one of the main Proutists there, and they said, we are choosing you as our leader because you have new ideas. We don't have new ideas, and in Portugal, as I mentioned, I find that what they're doing there very, very promising, And it shows that with a small group of people, there's maybe a handful of people working on that project from Prout, but now they have 100 organizations as members, and it's basically organizing within a local bioregion or social block level planning within the Prout. So, so I think that we need to continue doing what we're doing, but I also think that we need to think a little bit out of the box and do something extraordinary or big, or that can put us more on the map. And that's why I came up with this idea of a conference to attract some well-known speakers, get a big crowd, and because out of that, so many things can happen, like what happened in Portugal. It really kicked off a tremendous activity in Portugal, just having that conference there. Without that conference, what is happening now would not have happened, I believe.
Yes, I see. And I may mispronounce your name, but I see that Nachoy.
Yep, Nache. Hi. This is my first introduction to Prout, and my first question for you, firstly, thank you for the great introduction. I do have some questions. The first one, which is, can you speak a little bit more to the Varna theory that was mentioned on one of the slides and Prout's current take on class? And then the second question that I have is about the organizational structure and how you would describe that.
Okay. Yeah, that was a lot of points. So the Varna theory is basically a kind of macro historical view of the world. So in Marxism, we have the idea of the two classes, the workers and the capitalists, and there is continuous tension between the two, and then eventually the workers will win, and we will all live in a heavenly communist society. You know, it's a very simplistic kind of sort of class struggle, but that class struggle is real as well. Class, caste, you know, Wilkerson, the American writer, talks about caste, and we have caste as far as race, we have caste as far as economics. So that is definitely part of it, and Prout recognizes that. But Prout is also looking at history in sort of a grand scheme in the terms of Ibn Khaldun, the Muslim thinker, and Spengler, and these sort of macro thinkers. And so the idea is that history started out as a society of Shudras, very simple societies, which is called the Shudra society. And then that evolved into a warrior society with warriors and kings and so on, which again evolved into the intellectual society when the priests and the intellectuals started to take power. And now we are in the capitalist phase of that evolution. And as Wallerstein is pointing out, the capitalist phase will then lead into the next phase, which will be a Shudra phase, which then will lead into a warrior phase. But it is not just the cycle that goes like this, but it's more like a spiral. So the warrior phase of the next evolution will be very different from 2,000 years ago. It might be warrior values that will be common, like strong ethics, strong morality, strength, valor, but in a good sense. So, and then Prout has the fifth element, which is called the Sadvipra, which is similar to what Ken Wilber talks about, the integral personality. If you're familiar with spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber, which is the idea that there are people that embody all four of these. And that's sort of the ideal human being that is neither a capitalist, neither just an intellectual, but embody all four. And that is called the Sadvipra. And the Sadvipra is sort of a selfless leader of society that can make sure that things move on in a more or less harmonious, dynamic, progressive manner. So right now we are sort of at the cusp of the end of the capitalist acquisitive era, leading to a kind of a crisis situation, which then will lead to the next phase.
So it sounds like rather than being interested in the dissolution of class, there's an acceptance of it, and that there will be some kind of transformation that takes place for people to move from one class to another. Or I guess I don't understand what the goal.
It's more that these varnas are based on people's psychology, that people have different psychologies, and that through evolution we want to refine and become more and more balanced and have all of the psychologies, so become more and more, so that more and more people become sadvipras. So there, yes, there is class struggle to some extent and an acknowledgement of that, but at the same time, Prout, of course, is advocating an economic system that will try as much as possible to reduce tension and class struggle and class differences. So in other words, it has both sort of a macro view of the world that sort of is evolutionary and long term, and then at the same time a smaller cycle that involves struggle against exploitation and change and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Roy, you're muted, Roy.
Yeah. So I'm Roy. This is also my first time in joining this group at the invitation of some of my friends. What you were describing is what we grew up with, as in India as youngsters, which is the social class system. Very right, social class system. And there are a lot of things good. I mean, there are a lot of bad things that have happened from that, so that created the class system in India among Hindus. So this worker class.
That's different. So Sarkar it's similar, but he's not. He's very much against that caste system based on the Varnas. Yeah.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons why he got so much in trouble in India, because he spoke out against the caste system.
Right. So this is just, as a follow-up to Nachoy's questions, but we're familiar with that. But my basic thing, I had a question for you, is that is the Prout system, more, what is the priority? Is it economic development, or is it environmental and environmental development? Because you mentioned the donut, the circle, and in that, you mentioned that this is a sustainable economic system, the Prout.
Yeah.
But isn't there also a part of it which is because in parts of the world, I mean, there are lots and huge amounts of population that, that if they just have food on the table and a roof over their head, they consider themselves lucky. Yeah.
Right.
Fortunate. So I'm trying to see what is the priority of Prout? Is it mostly wealth? I mean, economic development, or is it also this basic human, welfare
The
develop?
the main priority of Prout would be to ensure that everybody has their basic needs met. Education, housing, food, shelter. That's the priority. And as far as that is concerned, the world is so imbalanced today. And as I mentioned in my presentation, the rich world has been exploiting the South for generations, and that needs to end. So that would be one of the first priorities of Prout, redistribution of wealth, which Doughnut Economics talks about, which Degrowth talks about. Same thing. Very, very important. I mean, like in the United States, there's so much inequality, so much poverty, and so on and so forth. So that those would be some of the first things to deal with. So in
See,
other words, to ensure that poor areas can develop properly, and that and so and that's of course is the difficulty for people living in very comfortable lives like we do, to realize that we need to make some sacrifices. That is a hard sell, but if we don't do it voluntarily, it will happen by a circumstance.
I see Prakash has his hand raised.
Yeah, so addressing some of the things about the priorities of Prout. Prout, it's important to understand that Prout is grounded in the philosophy of neo-humanism, which is expanding our concept of the well-being of all human beings, but also of all living beings and inanimate objects. So it's like the whole creation. And that's why Prout is based upon a universal spirituality in the sense of the expansion of mind and heart. And it's essential to look at that because our Prout's critique of capitalism is that it's a system of both psychoeconomic exploitation and political economic exploitation. And we need to understand how they work together. The political economic exploitation is addressed through developing systems of economic democracy, focusing on regional development, cooperative development, working together. But the underlying psychology of capitalism is grounded in superiority and inferiority, dogmas, that the whole system of class and caste is about superiority, inferiority, about separation, and saying that the source of revolution comes from the compassion and caring for all beings. So the goal is sort of liberation. And on an economic level, it means that the basic necessities should be, this is the universe is the joint property of all living beings. So that's how we view it, not as like a economic growth by itself is not meaningful. It's the growth in the happiness of living beings, and the human beings are embedded in that system of relationships and the whole creation. So it's a very holistic system, and it understands in a way that so many other systems don't talk about the internal roots of capitalism. It's grounded in self-interest. And that's sort of the source of the economic exploitation is people focus on self-interest instead of seeing the sense of we're part of a larger whole. And so in order to understand perspective on caste and class, you need to look at Sarkar's writings over his lifetime and his strong, call for people to overcome all of those psychic complexes, fear, superiority, inferiority, that creates division. And it's the foundation of the capitalist system we're experiencing all around us. So it's truly revolutionary because it's going to the core values of human beings and living beings. I
Exactly.
suppose the economic aspect is
Yeah.
important, but it's part of a whole picture.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
that, Prakash. That was nice.
I just want to say something about what you had mentioned a bit, Roar, with economic democracy. And someone had asked, well, what is Prout really trying to accomplish here? And the means are a significant part of the goal. And the means are a system of economic democracy, I think in large part comprising a strategy for what Prout is, who Prout is for. I mean, we're looking at a reversal of the beneficiaries of the system with Prout, because in the capitalist system, the beneficiaries are a select group of people that hold nearly all the reins of power through intense concentrations of wealth. What is the alternative to that and to state communism and totalitarianism? What is the middle ground? And Prout promotes this idea of a decentralized socialism rooted in economic democracy and regional systems forming together economic units. And that these units are comprised of leaders, special leaders that aren't primarily self-interested, but have special qualities, some would say spiritual qualities, of looking for the benevolent welfare of all the people. How does this come about? It seems almost fantastic living in the West with these nearly utopian visions of what this can look like. But we see on the fringes the beginnings of these alternative movements already budding in different places. And it's really exciting to look into these. So Ramesh, thank you for a really strong statement of where Prout contrasts with some of the real cutting edge of the progressive economic and environmental and bioregional movements. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. I also want to mention that it's, when the British came to India, there were large parts of India that was extremely sustainable, well-balanced, very advanced cultures. So this is also part of humanity. So sustainability, regenerative economics is not necessarily completely new. It has, it is part of us in our genes. We have, and as you're mentioning today, also there are so many examples of that. So I think it's important to see the sort of the positive history of humanity as well.
I see Alberta has her hand raised.
Thank you very much for this very well-researched presentation on what I think is really an important topic. I think that the take-home message is that there's a lot of similarities. There's some differences, but there's many things that tie us together with some of these progressive movements, and that will be stronger as we ally with the other progressives. Do you have some thinking on how we go about doing that?
Well, I mentioned this idea of
the Substack is one that we're thinking about, but there's probably many. I wonder if you have some other ideas.
Yeah, well, I think that we need to think of a way to sort of simplify our strategy, and I think this is just, as I mentioned already, economic democracy is something that so many people are talking about. Sustainability, these two things. An economic democracy system will create sustainability. Without that, we will not get. For example, Norway is, as I said, by so many economists, hailed as the most sustainable country in the world and so on. But if you look at the footprint of Norway, it has one of the highest carbon footprints in the world. So it's not at all sustainable, not at all. And so we're talking about something that is quite revolutionary and new as far as creating a new kind of society. So I think, and the good news is that there are so many people working in that direction today, and to collaborate with them, I think, is very, very important. So finding a common theme.
I think
Yes,
that's important. Yes.
yeah. So Scandinavia is highly democratic, politically and economically, but it's far from what Prout is talking about. Far, far from it. Why? Because these societies are extremely materialistic, extremely high in resource use, and very high in terms of loneliness and spiritual poverty. It is true. And that is what happens when people become more and more materialistic. Spiritual poverty, sadness, loneliness sets in the whole culture. So, and then the resource use is tremendous. It's yeah. So if we lived like Norwegians, we would need 5 planets today. That is basically the calculation. Yeah. So we need to.
I guess I think I want to highlight one of the things that you just said, and that is that it would be really good if we would convene some of our best thinkers to come up with what might be called in the vernacular min specs, the minimum specifications. So some of those key phrases where we can bring people together
Yeah.
and highlight.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea to bring people together to kind of brainstorm what the next phase could be, or what do we want to have a specific focus, like I mentioned.
What are the unifying themes that we have? And I'm not sure we have those defined. That's great thought.
Howard?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that it's the idea of democracy, I think, is a solid step forward for connecting with other groups, and I think it's a great idea. My experience with a lot of groups, a lot of different groups on the left and new economy groups, and what they're doing, I think it also entails that we have a multi-pronged sort of approach, and we can see that what we're doing around the world, there are different different projects or different strategies being employed, and I think we may need this sort of multi-pronged approach. So I mean, we have, like you mentioned, this project in Portugal, and I think having these types of actual projects on the ground doing something is very critical, especially for especially for young people. They want to see what you're doing and they want to get involved in something on the ground. And then we have these larger coalition group. We have larger coalitions and collaborations that we can form with a lot of these groups. We have to study them a lot and understand how to connect with them and project our ideas in a way that they'll understand what we're trying to do, and also connect with some similar ideas, and form different types of like this social forum that's going to take place in New York. There's a lot of people involved in food sovereignty, and so that feeds into also our interest in local economy, and so we can certainly connect with them and create collaborative, uh, movements or activities with them. And then there's also, especially, for example, what they're doing with Substacks and what we're doing also with a lot of different social media around the world. I think it's also important to have sort of I don't know if you call it a marketing approach, but to really explain and disseminate Prout ideas directly to the public. So I think that's, for example, another important strategy. So I think there's a number of different strategies, and people, involved in Prout are already involved in these different strategies. And I think it's important to strengthen them, whatever they're doing, and that's helpful. I think that would be helpful for what we're doing.
I think
Deepa?
Yeah. I was thinking about, we are talking about promoting Prout. The thing is, to promote Prout, we have to show examples of Prout in action, even in a small scale, because capitalism, communism, socialism are all exist in the world right now. So if we want to bring this new idea, people will want to know that, is it just a theory or is it working already?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one way to phrase that, or to use that, is to say that, Prout promotes cooperatives. The cooperative economies are strong in many parts of the world. So there are many examples, even though it is not exactly, part of from our movement, but we can show different examples like that. So that's one way to do it. But speaking of cooperatives, now in the Philippines, in Oroqueta, there is a Prout group that has started cooperatives with coconut growers, and that movement is becoming more and more strong. And they have the mayor of one of the cities is completely behind that project. So that's one very good example of a cooperative movement.
Yeah.
Can I just say a quick sentence? You just brought up cooperative movement, and I just want to mention that I'm so proud that my father, who was in the ministry at the state department, state government, his portfolio was in charge of cooperative industry, cooperative development, and he was the first one that introduced cooperative societies in Asia.
Oh, wow.
And he took it from, at the time, the Russian president, Bulganin, and Khrushchev was visiting India, and they came to Calcutta, and my father got the idea from them, because at that time, cooperative farming was very big in Russia.
Yeah.
And then, so he introduced cooperative transportation, cooperative banks, cooperative stores, cooperative farming, cooperative small-scale industries, and I'm so proud of that. Since you just brought it up.
Yeah. So you're from Bengal?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah, wonderful.
I want to
That's great.
interject at this point. I appreciate this presentation very much, Ramesh, and really enjoyed the conversation, some great discussion. But I want to be sensitive to, it's getting late for some people, and we're usually willing to extend. We try to schedule for an hour, but are willing to go up to half an hour extra, if there's some active discussion. And I think at this point we've exceeded that by a little bit. So I just want to genuinely thank you, Ramesh, for, I think it was a wonderful presentation, and putting it in the context that I think is vitally important. It's too easy for people familiar with Prout to feel like the cavalry arriving to save the day. And it's really more an effort of how do we start cooperating and working across many sort of organizational and individual approaches. Like I think you pointed out, and Howard touched on, there are many things already happening. And it's just, how do
Yeah.
we build a massive movement that can actually just, you know, I guess essentially implement the systemic change that's needed on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and in that regard, I see what is happening as an organic evolution of things that are examples of Prout in action. So as a philosophy and as an ideology, Prout is not a reaction against something, but pointing to very important principles and evolutionary principles within humanity. It is sort of pointing towards what is already happening and what will continue to happen on a larger scale. What needs to happen.
Well said. Yeah,
Thanks, Ramesh, for the
Yeah.
presentation.
yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. And I encourage people, keep checking, you know, we continue to schedule programs. I think they are by and large of great interest to people that are concerned about what's happening and ways to address in positive ways where we can go. So thank you again, Ramesh, and for all of you that were in attendance.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.